Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel back to the 19th century, not as soldiers or inventors, but as the smallest, most vulnerable members of society, a newborn baby in Victorian America. We'll be exploring the strange, strict, and often baffling world of their parenting philosophies. And fair warning, the advice from this era is so wildly different from today that, statistically speaking, you might not even make it through the first couple of years. No pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop a comment and let me know what city you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how spread out our little late night history club is. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't a loving face or a warm embrace. It's the smell. A sharp, clean, almost medicinal scent carbolic acid. Maybe that cuts through the air. The world is a blur of muted light and shadow. And the sounds are muffled, respectful, almost like a library. There's no triumphant cry of "it's a boy" or "it's a girl." Instead, there are the low, serious tones of a man's voice, the rustle of starched linen, and the distant, polite murmur of a woman who is not your mother. You've arrived. But this isn't a party. It's a procedure. You are born into the era of the professional. The messy, communal, female-led world of midwifery is fading among the respectable middle and upper classes. In its place is the doctor. He is a man of science, of order. He has managed your arrival with calm, detached efficiency. Your mother, having done her part, is now resting. She might have been given laudanum or another sedative, not just for pain, but to ensure she remains passive, patient, and proper. In this world, even the primal act of birth is expected to have a certain decorum. You, the baby, are the successful outcome of this well-managed event. A pair of hands, firm and unfamiliar, lift you. They belong to a nurse, a woman hired for this exact purpose. You are weighed, measured, and inspected. Your first bath is quick and businesslike. There's no cooing, no playful splashing. You are simply a new, delicate object that needs to be cleaned and catalogued. You're rewrapped, or rather, bound in layers of cloth. This is swaddling, and it's meant to keep you warm, secure, and, most importantly, still. Your limbs are pinned, your movements restricted. The logic is that this will help your limbs grow straight and prevent you from startling yourself or, heaven forbid, scratching your own face. It also makes you a very convenient, easy-to-manage little parcel. Your first meeting with your mother is a brief, formal affair. You are brought to her bedside, a perfect, clean, quiet bundle. She is pale and propped up on pillows, looking more like a delicate patient than a new mom. She might touch your cheek with a fingertip, her movements slow and careful. This is the beginning of her lying in period. This is one of those curious Victorian customs that served as both a medical prescription and a status symbol. For the next month, sometimes longer, your mother will be confined to her room, or even just her bed. She is not to exert herself in any way. All household duties and all your care are deferred to the staff. It shows the world that your father is successful enough to afford a household that can run without its mistress for an entire month. The unintended consequence of this practice is an immediate enforced distance between you and her. She is recovering over there. You are existing over here. Your needs are met by the nurse and soon the nanny. Your mother is a faint, perfumed presence you visit for a few minutes each day, like a tiny, mute dignitary paying a state visit. And this is where we stumble upon a question that historians and sociologists still wrestle with. Did this structured, almost business-like approach to birth and early infancy mean that Victorian parents felt a less intense bond with their newborns? Some argue that yes, this outsourcing of early care to professionals created an emotional distance that would define your entire childhood. It set a precedent for a relationship based on duty and propriety rather than spontaneous affection. Others propose a more somber theory. In an age where infant mortality was terrifyingly high, this emotional reserve was a form of self-preservation. Perhaps it was easier to endure the potential loss of a child if you hadn't allowed yourself to become hopelessly, deeply attached from the first breath. Was their emotional distance a feature of their character? Or was it a shield, forged in a world where a simple fever could steal you away in the night? We'll likely never know for sure. For now, though, you don't know any of this. You just know the tight wrap of your swaddling clothes, the hushed quiet of the house, and the strange-smelling efficiency of the people who handle you. You have been born not into a chaotic mess of family love, but into a quiet, well-ordered system. And your first unspoken lesson is clear. Your job is not to be loud or demanding. Your job is to be good, to be quiet, to fit neatly into the life that has been prepared for you. Your time in your mother's orbit is over for now. You feel yourself being lifted once more, a tiny, swaddled log in the arms of the nurse. You leave the quiet, dimly lit bedroom and move into a hallway. The floorboards creak a different tone out here. The air changes. You pass closed doors behind which the adult life of the house hums along, a mystery you are not a part of. Often you are carried upwards, one flight of stairs, maybe two. The higher you go, the further you are from the heart of the home, the drawing room, the dining room, the study. You are ascending to your own separate kingdom, the nursery. The door swings open, and a new world envelops you. It's one of the largest and dirtiest rooms in the house, usually at the very top. Where the light is best and the air is considered cleaner, away from the grime of the street. Your first impression is of scale. The ceiling is a vast, white desert miles above you. A tall, sash window stands like a giant's doorway to the sky, its glass panes often barred, a feature that is both for your safety and a subtle hint at your confinement. The furniture is heavy and dark, a formidable wooden crib with high sides, a sturdy rocking horse frozen in mid-gallop, a large armoire for your clothes, and a simple table and chairs. This is your domain. For the next several years, this room, or suite of rooms if your family is wealthy enough to afford a separate day nursery and night nursery, will be your entire universe. It is a self-contained outpost of childhood, intentionally quarantined from the rest of the house. Downstairs is the world of adults of complex rules, low voices, and fragile decorum. Up here is the world of children of structured noise, controlled play, and its own rigid set of laws. The only real connection between these two worlds is the staircase and the woman who will soon become the center of your life. Your gaze, unfocused as it is, might be drawn to the walls. And here we find one of the era's most beautifully tragic little mistakes. In an effort to make your world bright and cheerful, your parents may have chosen the most fashionable wallpaper available, a vibrant, rich emerald green. It might be printed with charming scenes of pastoral life, children flying kites, or whimsical animals. It is a feast for the eyes, a symbol of your parents' affluence and good taste, as this particular pigment, Sheeless green, was all the rage. It's also spectacularly toxic. The pigment was made with arsenic. On damp days, the arsenic in the wallpaper could be released into the air as a poisonous gas. You are literally living inside a pretty, poison-laced box. Doctors of the time would puzzle over why children in these beautiful nurseries often grew lethargic, sickly, or failed to thrive, never once suspecting the cheerful walls themselves were the culprit. This brings us to one of the great debates about Victorian child rearing. What was the nursery for? Was this separation an act of love or an act of convenience? The official line, promoted by countless child care manuals of the day, was that the nursery was a scientifically designed environment for the child's optimal development. It was a space with fresh air, good light, and regulated temperatures, free from the drafts and adult conversations of the downstairs world. It was a place where a child could be a child, albeit a very well-behaved and scheduled one. Proponents argued it was a compassionate, modern innovation, a clean slate on which to raise a healthy, moral human being. But there's another, less charitable interpretation that many historians lean towards. The nursery was, quite simply, a containment strategy. It was a way for the adults to maintain their serene, orderly existence without the constant, chaotic interruption of children. Children are noisy, they are messy, they are demanding. By placing them in a dedicated space at the top of the house, under the supervision of a paid professional, the parents could effectively outsource the most exhausting parts of child rearing. They could love you in theory and visit you in controlled, scheduled bursts, without having to deal with the relentless reality of your existence. Was the nursery a sanctuary for the child, or was it a fortress for the parents protecting them from the siege of parenthood? The answer is probably a bit of both, a muddle of good intentions and a desperate desire for peace and quiet. For now you are placed gently into the fortress-like crib. The high bars rise up around you like the columns of a palace or the bars of a cell. Depending on your mood, the world shrinks to this small, confined space. The sounds of the house, a distant chime of a clock, a muffled voice from below are alien and remote. Your only view is of the patterned, possibly poisonous wallpaper in that vast, distant ceiling. You are safe. You are provided for. And you are utterly, completely separate. Your new life in your new kingdom has begun. In the quiet, orderly kingdom of the nursery, you soon learn there is a queen. She is not the soft, perfumed lady who occasionally visits, but a figure of constant presence and absolute authority. She is your nanny. The nurse who attended your birth and your mother's lying-in period was a temporary specialist. The nanny is a permanent fixture, the chief architect of your early life. Her hands are not soft and manicured like your mother's. They are capable, often chapped from scrubbing and washing. Her dress is not silk or lace, but practical, dark serge or starched cotton. She smells of soap and coal dust and perhaps a faint, reassuring scent of peppermint. When you cry, it is her face that appears over the high walls of your crib. When you are hungry, it is her hand that brings the bottle. When you are changed, bathed, and dressed, it is her efficient, practiced movements that get the job done. You are, in effect, her charge. Her career, her reputation, her entire livelihood rests on her ability to manage you successfully. A good baby, in her world, is one who is quiet, sleeps through the night as soon as possible, and adheres to a strict schedule. Your compliance is a reflection of her competence. Therefore, from a very early age, you are being trained, not with overt cruelty, but with a relentless, gentle but firm consistency. Your cries might be ignored for a prescribed period to teach you that fussing is fruitless. You will be fed by the clock, not by your own hunger cues, because routine is the bedrock of a good character. This relationship is the source of one of the most poignant, undebated aspects of a Victorian upper-class childhood. You are forming your primary attachment to a paid employee. Your nanny is your source of comfort, your disciplinarian, your playmate, and your teacher. She is your functional mother. Your biological parents, meanwhile, are more like distant, benevolent monarchs. They are figures to be admired, respected, and slightly feared. They appear for the children's hour, a brief, formal daily audience, where you are expected to be on your best behavior. And here we find a fascinating, if slightly sad, little bit of social machinery. The nanny often acted as an emotional gatekeeper. She might report on your progress to your parents, curating her stories to present you and, by extension, herself in the best possible light. Master Timothy was very good today, Mom. He recited his alphabet twice. She would likely omit the part about the preceding hour-long tantrum over a dropped biscuit. This created a carefully managed, idealized version of you for your parents' consumption. They saw the polished final product, not the messy process of your development. This outsourcing of affection led to some deeply complicated emotional dynamics. Many children, quite naturally, grew to love their nannies with a fierce, primal devotion. This was often a source of quiet anxiety for the mothers. Imagine seeing your own child run past you, arms outstretched to greet a servant. It could stir feelings of jealousy, inadequacy, and resentment. Sometimes, a nanny who was deemed loved by the children would be dismissed, a sudden and inexplicable loss that would be a child's first, bewildering experience of grief. The official reason would be some minor infraction, but the real crime was emotional overreach. A nanny's job was to provide care, not to win hearts that rightly belonged in theory to the mother. Historians are still untangling the long-term psychological effects of this hired mother system. Did it create a generation of adults who were emotionally detached, finding it difficult to form close, intimate bonds? Some psychoanalytic theories from the 20th century would certainly suggest so, arguing that this early separation from the primary caregiver could lead to a lifetime of attachment issues. They do say you were being wired to associate care with a transaction rather than with unconditional love. However, Other historians offer a more nuanced view. They argue that many nannies were genuinely loving and provided a stable, secure presence in a child's life, sometimes more so than the remote informal parents. They also point out that the system was not universal. It was primarily a feature of the urban upper and burgeoning middle classes. For the vast majority of families, farmers, laborers, immigrants, child rearing was a hands-on, chaotic, and communal affair. Your nanny was a status symbol, a living testament to the fact that your family could afford not to raise its own children. But you don't understand any of this complex social signaling. You only know the reality of your small world. Your mother is the beautiful, smiling lady you see at designated times. Your nanny is the one who wipes your tears, who knows exactly how you like your toast cut, and whose voice is the soundtrack to your days. You are learning a fundamental emotional blueprint. The person you love the most, the person who holds your world together, is not entirely yours. She can be sent away, and the two people you are supposed to love the most are polite, well-dressed strangers who smell like perfume and cigars. It's a quiet, confusing lesson in love, loss, and the unspoken rules of a world that values propriety above all else. The world outside your nursery window is often gray and cold, but inside, a different kind of chill is deliberately cultivated. This is your introduction to the peculiar and deeply ingrained philosophy of hardening. It's not about making you cruel or unfeeling. It's about making you physically and morally robust, forging you into a resilient creature who will not be felled by a common cold or a weak character. And it starts with your bath. There is no gentle immersion into warm, sudsy water. Instead, your nanny, following the explicit instructions of childcare manuals and doctors of the day, plunges you into a tub of cold water. It is a shocking, breathtaking experience. Your instinctive gasp and cry are seen not as a sign of distress, but as a healthy reaction, a sign that your lungs are working vigorously. The theory espoused by figures like the philosopher John Locke from a century prior, but still wildly popular, was that cold water stimulated the body, invigorated the circulation, and built up a tolerance to the elements. A child accustomed to cold baths, so the thinking went, would be less likely to catch a chill when exposed to a draft or a damp winter's day. It was a baptism by ice, intended to wash away weakness. After the brisk and pleasant bath, you are not wrapped in a thick, fluffy towel. You are rubbed down vigorously with a coarse cloth, a process meant to further stimulate the skin and bring a healthy glow. Then you are dressed in simple, light clothing regardless of the season. The Victorian nursery was not a cozy, overheated den. It was intentionally kept cool. Windows were often left cracked open, even in winter, to ensure a constant supply of fresh, bracing air. Your crib is similarly austere. There are no plush bumpers or soft, warm duvets. You are likely sleeping on a firm, horsehair mattress, which was believed to be better for your posture than a soft feather bed. You are covered with a single light blanket. The fear of coddling a child was immense. To be too warm, too comfortable, was to be made soft and vulnerable. Parents and nannies lived in terror of their children becoming hothouse flowers, too delicate to survive in the real world. Every draft you endured, every shiver you suppressed, was considered a deposit in your account of physical fortitude. This hardening process extended to your diet as well. Your food is plain simple, and served at regular, unchangeable intervals. It is sustenance, not pleasure. You might be given bland porridges, broths, and boiled meats. Sugary treats are rare, seen as a corrupting influence that could lead to a weak constitution and an excitable temperament. You are taught to eat what is placed before you without complaint. To be a picky eater was a sign of a flawed character, a willfulness that needed to be corrected. And here we discover a wonderfully bizarre and forgotten detail: the war on fruit. Many influential child care experts of the 19th century were deeply suspicious of fruit, especially for young children. They believed that raw fruit was difficult to digest and could cause all manner of gastric disturbances. They especially feared it might ferment in the stomach, leading to a state of moral and physical decay. So, while you might be given heavily stewed apples or pears, the simple joy of biting into a crisp, fresh apple or a juicy peach was often denied to you. a forbidden pleasure deemed too risky for your delicate system. The debate among historians is about the true motivation behind this philosophy. Was hardening genuinely a health-driven practice based on the best, albeit flawed, medical knowledge of the time, or was it something more? Some scholars argue that it was a thinly veiled form of social conditioning. By denying physical comfort and sensory pleasure, the system was teaching you from infancy to suppress your own desires, to endure hardship without complaint, and to prioritize discipline over instinct. It was a way to mold a person who would be well suited to a society that valued stoicism, self-control, and emotional restraint. A child who learns not to cry from a cold bath might grow into a man who doesn't flinch at financial loss, or a woman who bears social slights with quiet dignity. Others argue that we should view it through the lens of their understanding of science. They were living in a pre-germ theory world for much of this period. They didn't know about viruses and bacteria. They saw illness as a product of imbalance, of environmental factors like miasmas, bad air, or of internal weakness. Hardening the body seemed a perfectly logical defense against these invisible threats. They were, in their own way, trying to give you the best possible armor for a world full of dangers they didn't fully understand. Was it a misguided attempt at vaccination by discomfort? Whatever the reason, the effect on you is profound. You learn that your physical sensations are not to be trusted. Feeling cold does not mean you need another blanket. Feeling hungry does not mean you will be fed. Your body's signals are subordinate to the rigid schedule and the hardening philosophy imposed upon you. You are a small soldier in training, and your own comfort is the first enemy you must learn to defeat. The world you are being taught is not a place that will bend to your needs. It is a place you must learn to endure. As you graduate from a helpless infant into a curious, stumbling toddler, a new and far more abstract battle begins. This is the war against your will. The moment you discover the power of the word no, the moment you first throw a toy in a fit of pique or refuse to eat your bland porridge, you are no longer just a charge to be kept clean and fed. You have revealed yourself to have a will of your own, and in the Victorian mindset, a child's will is a dangerous, sinful thing that must be broken. This was seen as cruelty. It was viewed as an act of profound love and moral responsibility. Child-rearing manuals of the era are filled with grim, serious advice on this very subject. They speak of the child's spirit as a wild horse that must be tamed, or a crooked sapling that must be forced straight before it grows into an old, useless tree. Your natural impulses, your curiosity, your stubbornness, your flashes of anger are interpreted not as normal stages of development, but as evidence of humanity as fallen, sinful nature. Your soul's salvation and your future as a respectable member of society depended on your parents' and nanny's ability to conquer this innate selfishness. The process of will breaking was systematic. It was a contest of endurance, and you, the child, were meant to lose every time. If you refused to eat your breakfast, the plate would be taken away without comment. It would then be presented to you, cold and congealed, for lunch, and again for dinner. This would continue until your hunger finally overpowered your defiance. The lesson was simple: your will is temporary, the rules are eternal. A tantrum in the nursery was not met with soothing words or attempts to understand the cause of your frustration. It was met with a swift and decisive response. You might be physically restrained, held firmly until your struggles ceased. Or you might be isolated, locked in a closet or a separate room for a prescribed period of cooling off. The goal was not to punish you in anger, but to demonstrate the utter futility of your emotional outbursts. The message was that your rage is powerless against the calm, unyielding authority of the adult world. One of the key figures looming over this philosophy was a woman named Susanna Wesley, mother of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. Though she lived in the 18th century, her diaries and letters on child rearing were enormously influential throughout the 19th. She famously wrote about the need to break the will of a child and bring his will to your disposal. She advocated for teaching a child to fear the rod and to cry softly. Her methods, which involved punishing a child for the same offense repeatedly until the behavior was extinguished, became a kind of gospel for many devout Victorian parents. Here's a peculiar and telling detail of this philosophy: the absolute terror of a left-handed child. In a world obsessed with order and conformity, left-handedness was seen as a sign of deviance. a physical manifestation of a willful, contrary nature. It was considered sinister, a word whose Latin root, coincidentally, means on the left side. A child who showed a preference for their left hand would have that hand tied behind their back or placed in a stiff, uncomfortable mitten. They would be forced, sometimes for years, to use their right hand, all in an effort to suppress this unnatural inclination. It was a small-scale version of the larger project. Your innate tendencies are wrong. They must be corrected and brought into line with the established norm. The historical debate here is a sensitive one. Was this while breaking simply a form of child abuse, cloaked in the language of morality and religion? From a modern perspective, the answer seems an obvious yes. The methods described are psychologically damaging and would be completely unacceptable today. We view a child's burgeoning will as a healthy sign of their developing identity, something to be guided, not crushed. However, many historians err just to understand it in their context. They argue that for many Victorians, this was a matter of eternal consequence. They genuinely believed they were fighting a battle for your soul against the forces of evil. In their view, a child with an unbroken will would grow into a self-absorbed, indulgent, and immoral adult destined for social ruin and, quite possibly, eternal damnation. When seen in that light, their harsh methods were, in their minds, a painful but necessary spiritual surgery. They were hurting you now to save you forever. This view is complicated by the fact that many of the same manuals that advocated for breaking the will also cautioned against punishing a child in anger. The discipline was meant to be calm, deliberate, and dispassionate. It was a righteous duty, not an emotional release for a frustrated parent. Did this make it better or worse? Historians still debate whether this cold, calculated approach was more or less damaging than a spontaneous flash of parental anger. For you, the toddler, the philosophical nuances are irrelevant. You just learn the rules of the game. You learn that expressing strong desires leads to unpleasant consequences. You learn that defiance is a battle you can never win. You learn that the path of least resistance is the path to a peaceful life. The fire of your own will begins to bank down, replaced by a cautious, watchful obedience. You are being tamed. And while the adults see this as a moral victory, a small, quiet part of you is learning to hide, to keep your truest self locked away where the all-seeing eyes of the grown-ups can't find it. Your world, once measured in naps and feedings, is now sliced into thin, rigid pieces by the relentless ticking of the clock. Life in the Victorian nursery is not a gentle, flowing river. It is a meticulously engineered canal with locks and gates controlling every aspect of your day. The tyranny of the clock is absolute, and its purpose is to instill in you the virtues of order, punctuality, and self-control before you can even properly tell time. Your day begins at a precise hour, perhaps 7 in the morning. Not a minute before, not a minute after. You are woken by your nanny regardless of whether you are still sound asleep. The day has begun, and you must begin with it. First comes the cold bath and dressing, a brisk, efficient process. Then breakfast, served at exactly 7:30. You have a set amount of time to eat. Dawdling is not permitted. After breakfast comes the morning constitutional. This is not a playful romp in the park. It is a brisk, purposeful walk, designed for health and exposure to fresh air. You will walk, or be pushed in a perambulator, for a prescribed duration, often along the same approved route day after day. Then it is back to the nursery for a period of structured lessons or educational play, which will last until the stroke of noon. Lunch is at midday sharp. It is followed by a mandatory nap. It does not matter if you are not tired. You will lie quietly in your bed in a darkened room for the allotted time, typically 1 to 2 hours. This is a time for quiet, for rest, for submission to the schedule. To be found playing or chattering in your crib during nap time is a serious infraction. The afternoon mirrors the morning, another period of controlled activity, perhaps some light sewing for a girl or drawing for a boy. This might be followed by another, shorter constitutional before it is time to be cleaned and dressed for the most important event of the day, the children's hour. This too is immovably fixed in the schedule, perhaps from 5 to 6 in the evening. After your brief formal audience with your parents, you are returned to the nursery for your supper. It is a simple meal and eaten quickly. Then, as the clock nears your designated bedtime, say 7 or 8 o'clock, the winding down process begins. Your toys are put away, your clothes for the next day are laid out, and you say your prayers under the watchful eye of your nanny. You are in bed at the appointed minute. The lamp is extinguished, and you are expected to fall asleep promptly without fuss. This rigid scheduling was championed by countless popular advice books. One of the most influential was a tome called The Management of Infancy by a physician named Andrew Combe. He and his contemporaries preached that regularity was the key to a healthy body and a sound mind. They believed the human body was a machine that thrived on routine. A regular schedule for eating, sleeping, and even bowel movements was considered essential for physical well-being. But it was also deeply tied to moral character. A child who lived by the clock was learning to suppress impulsive desires and to subordinate their own whims to a higher, external authority. It was discipline in its purest, most pervasive form. And here we find a strange little quirk born of this obsession, the infant trainer. For wealthy families who found their nanny incapable of instilling this clockwork routine, it was possible to hire a specialist. This was a formidable woman, a sort of baby drill sergeant, who would come into the home for a few weeks with the sole purpose of getting the infant onto a strict, manageable schedule. Her methods were relentless. She would enforce feeding times with military precision and utilize various techniques to train the baby to sleep through the night, often involving letting the child cry it out to the point of exhaustion. She was expensive, but for parents desperate for order and a full night's sleep, she was a godsend. Once the baby was broken, or rather trained, she would move on to the next chaotic household. So why this fanatical devotion to the schedule? Historians see it as a direct reflection of the broader social and economic changes of the 19th century. This was the age of the factory, the railroad, and the telegraph. The world was becoming increasingly standardized, mechanized, and synchronized. The factory whistle, the train timetable, the pocket watch, these were the symbols of a new modern era. Punctuality and efficiency were no longer just personal virtues, they were economic necessities. The argument is that this middle-class obsession with scheduling their children's lives was a way of preparing them for this new world. You were being conditioned from the nursery to be a reliable, punctual, and productive member of industrial capitalist society. You were learning to internalize the logic of the assembly line, a place for everything, and everything in its place, a time for every task, and every task in its time. Others argue that it was also a coping mechanism for parents and nannies. Managing children is unpredictable, exhausting work. Imposing a rigid schedule was a way to create a sense of control and order in the face of domestic chaos. It made the day predictable. It broke the monumental task of childcare into a series of smaller, manageable, time-bound chunks. Was it for the child's good, or for the caregiver's sanity? This is still a subject of scholarly debate. For you, living inside this timetable, it shapes your entire perception of reality. You learn that time is not your own. It is a cage of minutes and hours, and your life must fit within its bars. You learn that your own internal rhythms, hunger, sleepiness, a sudden urge to run and shout are irrelevant. There is a time for eating, a time for sleeping, a time for quiet contemplation, and the clock on the nursery wall is the unblinking, unfeeling God that dictates it all. As you grow, you begin to venture out of the nursery more often, but these excursions come with a new and vital lesson, the cornerstone of Victorian childhood etiquette. You are to be seen and not heard. This simple phrase is the golden rule, the prime directive that governs your every interaction with the adult world. It is a philosophy of quiet, unobtrusive presence. Your very posture is policed. You are taught to stand up straight when an adult enters the room, to keep your hands still at your sides, and to never, ever interrupt a conversation. When spoken to, you are to answer clearly and concisely using mom or sir. You are not to offer your own opinions unless explicitly asked, and even then, they should be modest and agreeable. Your role in any adult gathering is that of a small, well-behaved piece of furniture, one that happens to be alive. Imagine you are brought down to the drawing room during your designated children's hour. The room is a forest of adult legs and heavy furniture. The air is thick with the scent of your father's cigar smoke and the faint perfume from your mother's dress. Your parents might be entertaining guests. You are expected to enter the room silently, walk to the guest, and offer a polite handshake if you are a boy, or a small curtsy if you are a girl. You might be asked a simple prescribed question. "And how are your lessons, young man?" To which you have a prepared answer, "Very well, thank you, sir." After this brief inspection, you are to find a small, out-of-the-way chair and sit. You are to sit upright, your feet flat on the floor, your hands folded in your lap. Your eyes are to be cast down or directed at a neutral object. It is considered deeply impolite to stare at the adults or to visibly eavesdrop on their conversation, even though you are in the same room. You are physically present but socially invisible. The goal is to cause zero disruption, to be a testament to your parents' good breeding and your nanny's excellent training. Any fidgeting, any side expression of boredom, any unsolicited comment would bring a sharp, disapproving glance from your mother, a look that promises a stern talking to later back in the nursery. The concept of seen and not heard extended even to noise. Children were expected to move quietly through the house. Running was forbidden. Shouting was a cardinal sin. Even your laughter was meant to be controlled, a gentle titter, not a boisterous guffaw. The ideal child was a quiet phantom, gliding through the household, leaving no trace. This brings us to a rather sad little piece of trivia from this era, the moral baby. In the most extreme interpretations of this philosophy, even infants were expected to be quiet. Child care manuals sometimes praised babies who did not cry, seeing it as a sign of a naturally placid and virtuous temperament. A crying baby was a sign of a flawed character asserting itself. Some nannies and parents would go to great lengths to quiet a fussy baby, not just for their own peace, but because they genuinely believed a quiet infant was a morally superior one. So where did this obsession with silence and invisibility come from? Historians trace it back to a confluence of social and philosophical trends. The rise of the middle class created a new emphasis on the home as a sanctuary. The home was meant to be a peaceful, orderly retreat from the chaotic, dirty world of commerce and industry. The noisy, unpredictable nature of children was a direct threat to this domestic ideal. Containing and silencing children was a way of preserving the sanctity of the adult sphere. Furthermore, there was a philosophical belief that children were not simply little adults. They were seen as fundamentally different beings, existing in a transitional state between animal instinct and civilized rationality. Their thoughts and opinions were considered unformed, trivial, and not worth the attention of serious-minded adults. To listen to a child's chatter was to indulge in foolishness. The adult world was for serious matters, and you were not yet qualified to participate. Historians still debate the psychological impact of this. Did this constant invalidation of a child's inner world lead to a generation of adults with low self-esteem and a fear of self-expression? Or did it, as proponents would have argued, instill a healthy sense of humility and respect for one's elders? There's a more pragmatic interpretation as well. Houses were not soundproof. A noisy child in the nursery could be heard all over the house. For a mother trying to manage a household, entertain guests, or simply have a moment of peace, the constant noise of children could be genuinely maddening. Seen and not heard was, on one level, a desperate plea for quiet. It was less about psychological theory and more about acoustic reality. For you, the child, this rule has a profound effect. You learn that your presence is conditional. You are welcome as long as you are silent and still. You learn that the adult world is a fascinating, important place that you can only observe from a safe, silent distance. You become an expert in nonverbal cues, learning to read the mood of a room from a glance, a slight frown, a change in tone. You develop a rich inner life, because your thoughts and feelings have nowhere else to go. You are seen, yes. You are a pretty picture in a sailor suit or a lace dress, sitting quietly on your chair. But the real you, the noisy, curious, opinionated you, is learning to stay hidden deep inside, waiting for a time when you might finally be heard. The dining room is a new battlefield, and the weapons are an intimidating arsenal of silver and porcelain. As you get old enough to leave the nursery for family meals, a milestone that is by no means guaranteed in early childhood, you enter the world of dinner table diplomacy. Here, the rules are more complex and the stakes feel impossibly high. Using the wrong fork is not just a simple mistake. It is a public declaration of your poor upbringing, a stain on your family asala. Your training began long before you ever sat at the main table. In the nursery, your nanny drilled you on the basics. You were taught to sit up straight, never leaning back in your chair or putting your elbows on the table. You learned to take small bites, to chew with your mouth closed, and to never, ever speak with food in your mouth. You were taught to place your knife and fork together on the plate when you were finished, a silent signal to the staff that your plate could be clear. But graduating to the family dining room is like moving from a flight simulator to a real jet. The table is a vast, white expanse of starched linen, gleaming with a bewildering array of silverware. There are different forks for fish, for meat, for salad, for dessert. There are multiple spoons, each with a specific purpose. There are knives for butter, for fish, for the main course. The glasses multiply as well, one for water, perhaps another for a sip of heavily diluted wine, considered a health tonic in some households. Your first challenge is simply to navigate this minefield. You are taught to work from the outside in, using the outermost utensil for the first course and moving inward as the meal progresses. Conversation at the table is a minefield of its own. In keeping with the seen and not heard philosophy, you are not to initiate conversation. If an adult addresses you, you answer politely. You must not complain about the food, even if you detest it. You must not eat too quickly, which suggests greed, nor too slowly, which suggests you are a picky eater. You must appear to be enjoying your meal in a calm, dignified, and efficient manner. The sheer number of rules is dizzying. You must not gesture with your silverware. You must not push food onto your fork with your finger. Use a piece of bread for that. You must not slurp your soup. You must sip it silently from the side of the spoon. Bread should be broken, not cut, into small, bite-sized pieces and buttered one piece at a time. The list is endless, a complex choreography that you are expected to perform flawlessly. And here we stumble upon a truly peculiar, and now extinct, piece of etiquette, the asparagus dilemma. For a time in the 19th century, there was a raging debate in etiquette manuals over how one should properly eat asparagus. Was it a finger food, or should it be eaten with a knife and fork? To eat it with your fingers seemed a bit too rustic, almost primal. But to cut the delicate spears with a knife was seen as clumsy and unsophisticated. The solution, for a time, was the invention of asparagus tongs, small, individual silver tongs that allowed a diner to pick up a single spear without soiling their fingers. Owning a set was a subtle sign of being up to date on the latest, most fashionable social anxieties. Why this obsession with table manners? Historians see it as a powerful to-love class distinction. In an era of new money and social mobility, where fortunes could be made and lost in a generation, the old aristocratic families needed a way to differentiate themselves. You might be able to buy a big house and fancy clothes, but you couldn't easily fake a lifetime of ingrained, effortless table etiquette. It was a secret code. The way a person held their fork or ate their soup could instantly signal whether they were old money or nouveau rich. By drilling you relentlessly in these arcane rules, your parents were giving you a passport into the upper echelons of society. They were ensuring you would never embarrass yourself or them in a crucial social setting. Other scholars argue that it was also part of the broader Victorian project of controlling the body. The dinner table was a place where primal, animalistic urges, hunger, greed were on full display. The elaborate rules were a way of civilizing these instincts, of demonstrating that one's refined mind was in complete control of one's base physical needs. To eat with perfect etiquette was to prove that you were a civilized human being, not a mere animal. Historians still discuss whether this was about class signaling or a deeper philosophical need to conquer human nature. For you, the child at the table, it is mostly about terror. Use it in a high, straight-backed chair, your feet barely touching the floor. You watch your parents for cues, trying to mirror their movements. Every bite is taken with intense concentration. You are so focused on not making a mistake, not clinking your fork against your teeth, not dropping a pea on the tablecloth, that you barely taste the food. The dining room is not a place of nourishment or family connection. It is a place of performance, a test you must pass night after night. And the reward for a perfect performance is simply the absence of disapproval, a quiet, invisible passing grade in the relentless school of being a Victorian child. Your playroom, the nursery, is not a chaotic explosion of color and creativity. It is a carefully curated training ground for your future life, and nowhere is this more apparent than in your toys. From your earliest years, you are presented with a world of play that is rigidly, lably gendered. There is a clear and distinct line drawn down the center of the nursery, and you are taught from infancy never to cross it. If you are a girl, your corner of the room is a miniature domestic sphere. Your most prized possession is your doll. She is not a soft, cuddly companion. She is a serious responsibility. She is likely made of porcelain or bisque with a delicate, unsmiling face and a fragile body. She is a tool for practicing motherhood. You are given miniature sets of furniture, tiny tea services, and doll-sized sewing kits. Your play consists of dressing your doll, hosting imaginary tea parties, cleaning her miniature house, and nursing her when she is ill. You are rehearsing the life of a wife and mother, the only future that is presented to you as desirable or even possible. Your games are about nurturing, managing a household, and social grace. If you are a boy, your toys are about action, conquest, and the world outside the home. You have armies of lead soldiers painted in the bright uniforms of the British or American Army. Your games are about strategy, battle, and empire. You have wooden blocks for building forts and cities, not houses. You have rocking horses to practice your riding, and later, toy boats and trains, symbols of commerce and technological power. Your play is designed to instill the virtues of leadership, courage, and ambition. You are rehearsing for a life in the public sphere as a soldier, a businessman, an engineer, a leader. The crossover between these two worlds is not just discouraged. It is seen as deeply unnatural. A boy showing interest in a doll would be cause for serious concern. It would be seen as a sign of effemination, a worrying weakness of character that needed to be stamped out immediately. He would be sternly redirected to his soldiers or his building blocks. A girl wanting to play with toy soldiers would be seen as unladylike and aggressive, exhibiting traits that would make her an undesirable future wife. She would be gently but firmly guided back to her descent. This strict division is reflected in a fascinating and slightly unsettling piece of toy history, the rise of the character doll. In the latter half of the 19th century, doll makers began moving away from the generic, angelic faces of earlier dolls. Instead, they started producing dolls with more realistic, expressive faces pouting, crying, or looking surprised. The strange part is how they were marketed. Dolls with negative expressions were often sold as boy dolls and were intended to be used as villains or objects of discipline in the games of both boys and girls. The serene, beautiful, well-behaved dolls were exclusively for girls to mother. It subtly reinforced the idea that aggression and negative emotions were masculine traits, while placid sweetness was the female ideal. Why was this gender division so absolute? Historians point to the concept of separate spheres, a cornerstone of Victorian social ideology. This was the belief that men and women were fundamentally different and were created to occupy separate domains of life. The man's sphere was the public world of work, politics, and finance. The woman's sphere was the private world of the home and family. Her role was to be the angel in the house, a moral compass for her husband and children, creating a peaceful domestic refuge from the harsh realities of the outside world. The nursery was the primary training ground for these separate destinies. The toys were not just for fun, they were curriculum materials. They were designed to shape your desires, your skills, and your ambitions to fit neatly into your prescribed gender role. Scholars still debate the chicken and egg nature of this. Did these toys simply reflect the existing social reality, or were they a powerful force in creating and perpetuating it? By giving a girl only dolls, were parents simply preparing her for a likely future, or were they actively closing off all other possibilities in her mind? The consensus is that it was a powerful feedback loop. Society dictated the toys, and the toys in turn helped to build the next generation of that society. Of course, children are resourceful. There is plenty of anecdotal evidence from diaries and letters of children subverting these rules in secret. A boy might quietly create elaborate family dramas with his lead soldiers when the nanny wasn't looking. A girl might use her dollhouse furniture to build a mighty fortress, but these were acts of private rebellion. In public, and under the watchful eye of adults, the lines remain firm. For you, this has a deep and lasting impact. You are learning that your gender is one of the most important things about you. It determines not only what you can play with, but who you are allowed to be. The world of possibilities is sliced in half before you even know what possibilities are. Your imagination is being channeled down a narrow, pre-approved path. And the toys you are given are not just objects of play, they are tools of indoctrination, silently and relentlessly teaching you the precise shape of the box you are expected to live in for the rest of your life. Even when you are finally allowed to play, you soon discover that fun is not the primary objective. In the Victorian nursery, play is a serious business. It is seen as a powerful tool for moral and intellectual instruction. Every game, every puzzle, every activity is designed to be educational, edifying, and a lesson in virtue. The idea of playing simply for the sake of joyful, chaotic fun is a foreign and slightly suspicious concept. Your games are often thinly veiled lessons. You might have a set of dissected maps, which are what we would now call jigsaw puzzles. But instead of pictures of animals or fantasy scenes, they are maps of countries or continents. As you piece them together, you are expected to learn geography. The game of snakes and ladders, a popular import from India, was given a moralistic makeover. In the Victorian version, the squares you landed on were not random. The ladders represented virtues, thrift, piety, honesty that would help you advance in life. The snakes represented vices, greed, disobedience, vanity that would cause your downfall. Every roll of the dice was a mini drama about the consequences of your moral choices. Storytelling games followed the same pattern. You might play a card game where each card depicted a scene from the Bible or a historical event, and you had to arrange them in the correct chronological order. Even a simple set of alphabet blocks often had letters on one side and a moral value on the other. A for angel, B for Bible, D for duty, and so on. Fun was the sugar coating on the pill of instruction. The books you are given to read, or that are read to you, are similarly didactic. They are filled with stories of impossibly good children who are rewarded, and naughty children who meet with grim, cautionary fates. We'll delve into those terrifying bedtime stories later, but the principle was the same. Literature was a tool for character building, not for escapism. One of the most fascinating examples of this educational obsession is the object lesson. This was a teaching method popularized by educators like the Swiss theorist Johann Petzold, and it trickled down into nursery life. The idea was to teach a child about the world by focusing intensely on a single object. Your nanny or governess might place a simple object, like a lump of coal, on the table. You would then be guided through a series of questions about it. What color is it? Is it hard or soft? Where does it come from? What is it used for? This was meant to develop your powers of observation, reasoning, and vocabulary. While educational in theory, it could also be a dry, joyless exercise, turning the natural curiosity of a child into a formal, structured interrogation of the world. So where did this deep-seated belief that play must be purposeful come from? Historians connect it directly to the influence of evangelical Christianity and the so-called Protestant work ethic. In this worldview, idleness was a sin. Every moment of the day was to be used productively, either for work, for prayer, or for self-improvement. The idea of wasting time on frivolous, unproductive fun was morally suspect. Play, therefore, had to be justified. It had to have a higher purpose. It could only be sanctioned if it was contributing to your development as a moral, intelligent, and useful member of society. This creates a fascinating debate among historians of childhood. Did this approach succeed in creating a generation of intellectually curious and morally upright citizens? Or did it crush the very spirit of creativity and imagination it claimed to foster? Some scholars argue that by stripping play of its spontaneity and joy, Victorian adults were actually stifling the natural learning processes of children. They were teaching them that learning is a chore, a dry and formal task, rather than an exciting exploration of the world. By trying to control every outcome of play, they were preventing the very kind of innovative, out-of-the-box thinking that true creativity requires. Others argue that we are being too quick to judge. They point out that in an era without widespread public education, this kind of in-home, play-based learning was a genuine attempt to give children an intellectual head start. It was a form of parental investment in a child's future. They also note that children have an incredible capacity to find fun, even in the most structured environments. They would have found ways to imbue these educational games with their own narratives and their own sense of joy, regardless of the adult's intention. For you, the child in the nursery, the lesson is clear, even in your moments of leisure. You are being watched and evaluated. Your play is a performance. Are you learning your geography? Are you absorbing the moral lesson of the game? Are you correctly identifying the properties of the lump of coal? You learn that value is placed on results, on tangible improvement. The simple, aimless joy of building a tower of blocks just to knock it down, or of running in circles until you are dizzy, is a pleasure you must learn to indulge in guiltily, or not at all. Play is not a right, it is a privilege, and one that must be earned through quiet, productive, and morally upright behavior. Getting out of the nursery and into the fresh air is a daily ritual, but it is rarely an exercise in freedom. Your time outdoors is as structured and supervised as any lesson. It is the constitutional, a formal, orderly walk with a specific purpose to promote health, not to have fun. The idea of you running wild in a field, getting grass stains on your clothes and mud on your shoes, is a parent's or nanny's nightmare. Dressing for the constitutional is a production in itself. You are bundled into layers of clothing regardless of the weather. For a boy, this might mean a sailor suit or a stiff wool suit with knickerbockers. For a girl, it means a dress, multiple petticoats, long stockings, gloves, and a bonnet or hat that must be kept on at all times. Your clothes are restrictive, designed for appearance and propriety, not for active movement. The simple act of bending over to pick up an interesting stone is a challenge. Once dressed, the procession begins. You and your siblings, if you have them, walk in an orderly line, led by your nanny or governess. You are instructed to walk at a brisk, steady pace. Dawdling is frowned upon. Running ahead is a serious offense. You might be taken to a nearby park, but this is not the playground we know today. There are no slides, swings, or climbing frames. A Victorian park is a manicured, landscaped space designed for quiet contemplation and polite socializing. You are to stick to the designated paths. Walking on the grass is often forbidden. Your interactions with the world are carefully mediated. You are not to speak to strangers, especially children from a lower social class, who might be playing in a rougher, more boisterous manner. Your nanny acts as a vigilant gatekeeper, steering you away from any undesirable influences. Your walk is a bubble of middle-class respectability, moving through the public space, but not truly engaging with it. The purpose of this exercise, according to the health manuals of the day, was to expose you to fresh air, which was believed to be a powerful antidote to all sorts of illnesses. In an age of crowded, poorly ventilated cities, good air was a precious commodity. The constitutional was also seen as a way to build physical stamina and encourage good posture. It was a walking lesson in deportment. Here we find a small, charming, and slightly absurd detail of this outdoor life, the hoop and stick. This was one of the few universally approved outdoor toys. It was simple, a large wooden or metal hoop that you would roll on the ground, keeping it upright by tapping it with a stick. It was the perfect Victorian toy for several reasons. It encouraged brisk movement without being undignified. It kept you moving forward on the path, discouraging you from stopping or straying. It could be played with while maintaining a fairly upright posture. It was a form of active, yet controlled and orderly play. It was the physical embodiment of the constitutional itself, constant forward moving, and confined to the path. The historical debate around this practice centers on its true purpose. Was the highly controlled nature of these outings genuinely about safety and health? Or was it, once again, about social performance? Many historians argue that the constitutional was a form of public display. It was a chance for a family to show off their well-dressed, perfectly behaved children. Your orderly procession was a testament to your family's good breeding and social standing. The starched clothes, the polite demeanor, the watchful nanny, it was all street theater, designed to impress any neighbors or acquaintances you might encounter. Other scholars take a more psychological view. They suggest this intense control over outdoor play stemmed from a deep-seated Victorian anxiety about nature itself. Nature, in their worldview, was a wild, chaotic, and potentially dangerous force. It was the opposite of the ordered, civilized world they were trying to build. Letting a child play freely in nature was like letting a little bit of that chaos into their carefully constructed lives. So, they could take you to the park to experience nature, but only in a way that was tamed, manicured, and kept at a safe distance. You could look at the trees, but not climb them. You could walk by the pond, but not get wet. For you, the child, this means that the great outdoors is just another room with a higher ceiling. The rules of the nursery, be quiet, be still, be orderly, apply here as well. You learn that the world outside your home is not a place for exploration and adventure, but another stage for polite performance. You might long to chase a squirrel, to splash in a puddle, or to roll down a grassy hill, but you learn to suppress these urges. You walk along the gravel path, tapping your hoop with your stick, your eyes straight ahead. You are breathing the fresh air, you are getting your exercise, and you are learning that even under the wide open sky, you are living within invisible walls. Just as you are mastering the complex social codes of the nursery, a new authority figure enters your life. She is not your nanny, who is primarily concerned with your physical well-being on basic manners. This woman is here to shape your mind. She is your governess, and her arrival marks the beginning of your formal education in the new, more serious chapter of your childhood. The governess is a curious and often lonely figure in the Victorian household. She is not a servant, but she is not a member of the family either. She lives in a social limbo, a respectable but isolated position. She is typically a woman from a good but impoverished family, forced to work for a living, a situation that was seen as a tragic misfortune. She is educated, often more so than the lady of the house, but her financial dependence robs her of true status. She eats her meals alone or with you, the children, in the schoolroom. She is a paid professional, and her job is to transform you from a merely well-behaved child into an accomplished and educated one. Your life, which was already ruled by the clock, now becomes even more structured. The nursery officially becomes the schoolroom. Your mornings are no longer for walks and educational games. They are for lessons. The governess sits with you at a table, her posture perfect, her expression serious. The curriculum is broad but often shallow, especially for a girl. You will learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. You will study history, but it will be a history of kings and queens and great men, a narrative of national glory. You will learn geography, memorizing the names of capital cities and the lengths of rivers. If you are a girl, your education has a specific, ornamental purpose. You will be taught the accomplishments, a set of skills designed to make you a more desirable wife. These include drawing, playing the piano, and speaking a smattering of French or German. The goal is not to achieve mastery or to prepare you for a career, but to acquire enough skill to be able to entertain your husband and his guests. Your piano playing should be pleasant, not passionate. Your drawing should be pretty copies of other pictures, not bold, original creations. Your education is part of your dowry, a polish that increases your value on the marriage market. If you are a boy, your time with the governess is a preparatory stage. She will lay the foundations of your education before you are sent away to a boarding school like Eton or Harrow. Your studies will be more rigorous, with an emphasis on Latin, Greek, and mathematics, the cornerstones of a classical gentleman's education. The governess's job is to get you ready for the more demanding and often brutal world of the all-boys school. One of the strangest and most telling aspects of your education with the governess is the focus on penmanship. In an age before typewriters, handwriting was a crucial skill, but it was also a powerful signifier of class and character. You will spend hours upon hours practicing your letters, using a dip pen and an inkwell. There are specific, gendered styles of handwriting you are expected to learn. A girl's hand should be delicate, looping, and elegant. A boy's hand should be strong, clear, and businesslike. Your handwriting was seen as a direct reflection of your inner self. A messy, careless script was evidence of a messy, careless mind. The relationship between the governess and the family is a frequent subject of historical fascination. Was she a beloved mentor or a resented outsider? The answer, found in countless diaries and novels of the period, is both. For some children, the governess was a window to a wider world, an inspiring teacher who ignited a love of learning. She might be the only adult who truly engaged with their intellectual life. For others, she was a symbol of relentless correction, a stern taskmaster who represented the drudgery of lessons and the loss of playtime. Historians are also interested in the governess as a figure of social tension. She was a constant, awkward reminder of the class system. Her presence highlighted the family as wealth, but also the precarious position of women in society. She was a lady who had to work, and this made people uncomfortable. Did families hire governesses purely for educational reasons? Or was it also a status symbol, a way to signal that they were not just wealthy, but cultured? The debate continues, but it's likely a mixture of both genuine educational desire and social one-upmanship. For you, the arrival of the governess changes the texture of your days. Your nanny is still there for your physical needs, but your mind now belongs to this new woman. She corrects your grammar, drills you on your multiplication tables, and raps your knuckles with a ruler if your posture slumps during a piano lesson. She is the guardian of your intellect, just as your nanny is the guardian of your body. You are a project, and the team of specialists managing you has just expanded. You are being shaped, molded, and polished. Every aspect of your being under careful, professional supervision. The schoolroom is a quiet, serious place. The air smells of chalk dust, bookbinding glue, and the sharp tang of ink. Under the watchful eye of your governess, your education unfolds, and its primary method is rote memorization. The goal is not to teach you how to think critically, but to fill your mind with a vast storehouse of approved facts, figures, and verses. Your brain is seen as a vessel, and the governess's job is to pour knowledge into it until it is full. A typical lesson in history or geography consists of you reading a passage from a dry, dense textbook and then reciting it back, as close to verbatim as possible. You will memorize long lists of dates, the kings and queens of England in chronological order, the major battles of the Napoleonic Wars, the year Columbus sailed the ocean blue. You will learn the principal exports of Brazil and the exact height of the tallest mountain on each continent. There is no discussion of cause and effect, no analysis of different historical perspectives. The facts are presented as absolute, unchangeable truths. To question them would be a sign of impertinence. The pinnacle of this educational philosophy is the recitation of poetry in prose. You are assigned long passages from the works of poets like Tennyson, Longfellow, or Wordsworth, or eloquent speeches from Shakespeare. Your task is to commit them to memory, word for word, including the proper punctuation. You will then be called upon to stand and recite the passage for your governess, or perhaps even for your parents during the children's hour. Your performance is judged on two criteria: accuracy and delivery. You are expected to enunciate clearly with the proper dramatic inflections, but without excessive, unseemly emotion. It is a performance of retention, not of interpretation. This method was believed to have multiple benefits. First, it was seen as excellent training for the memory, a faculty that was considered a muscle to be exercised. A strong memory was a sign of a strong mind. Second, it was believed that by filling your head with the best that has been thought and said, these noble sentiments would be absorbed into your character by a kind of moral osmosis. By memorizing a poem about courage, you would, in theory, become more courageous. By reciting a passage about duty, you would become more dutiful. This brings us to a wonderfully dull and forgotten educational tool, the commonplace book. You would be given a blank notebook and instructed to copy out inspiring quotes, uplifting verses, and interesting facts that you encountered in your reading. It was a personal anthology of edifying material, a scrapbook of virtue. There was no room in the commonplace book for your own thoughts or reflections. Its purpose was to be a collection of other people's wisdom. This practice reveals the core of the educational philosophy. Learning was about receiving and recording, not creating and questioning. So what do historians make of this education by rote? The prevailing modern view, of course, is that it was a deeply flawed system. It discouraged critical thinking, creativity, and intellectual curiosity. It taught students what to think, not how to think. It created minds that were good at retaining information, but poor at analyzing it or applying it in new ways. Critics argue it was a system designed to produce compliant citizens and obedient employees, not innovators and leaders. However, some revisionist historians offer a more charitable interpretation. They argue that in an age with limited access to books and information, having a large mental repository of knowledge was a valuable asset. If you couldn't just Google a historical date or a line of poetry, having it stored in your memory was a form of intellectual capital. They also suggest that this deep immersion in classical literature and poetry, even if memorized by rote, gave students a shared cultural vocabulary and a strong foundation in the rhythms and structures of the English language. Is it possible that this system, for all its flaws, created a populace with a higher degree of literary and cultural literacy than we have today? The question is a source of ongoing academic debate. For you, in the schoolroom, the experience is one of mental endurance. Use it for hours, your mind churning, trying to force the stubborn words of a poem to stick in your memory. You feel the pressure to perform, the fear of stumbling over a line or forgetting a date. You learn that knowledge is something that is given to you, a set of right answers that you must learn to repeat. The idea that you might have your own interpretation of a poem, or that a historical event might have multiple causes and be viewed from different perspectives, is a concept that is never introduced. Your mind is being furnished like a room with heavy, unmovable, and respectable pieces of intellectual furniture. It is becoming a very well-ordered, but not a very creative space. As evening descends and the lamps are lit, your nanny or governess might gather you and your siblings for a bedtime story, but you will not be drifting off to sleep on a gentle cloud of whimsical fantasy. You are about to receive your nightly dose of moral terror. The cautionary tale is a cornerstone of your literary diet, and its primary ingredient is fear. These stories are designed to frighten you into being good. The plots are grimly predictable. They feature a child who is given a clear and simple rule by a well-meaning adult. The child, in a moment of willfulness or curiosity, disobeys the rule. The consequence is not a gentle scolding or a loss of privileges. The consequence is swift, brutal, and often permanent. The stories are a catalogue of childhood calamities, a final destination for the nursery set. One of the most infamous examples comes from the German book Stru WWEL Peter or Shock-Headed Peter, which was wildly popular in English translation. In the story of Little Suck a Thumb, a mother warns her son Conrad not to suck his thumbs. The moment she leaves the room, he pops his thumb back into his mouth. Instantly, the door bursts open and a great tall tailor leaps in, with a gigantic pair of scissors and snips off both of the boy's thumbs. The final illustration shows a pale, weeping Conrad with his bleeding, stumpy hands. The moral is stark and terrifying. Disobedience leads to mutilation. Another tale from the same collection, The Dreadful Story of Harriet and the Matches, tells of a girl who plays with matches despite the warnings of her mother and her cats. She accidentally sets her dress on fire and is burned to death, leaving behind nothing but a pile of ashes and her to read shoes. The cats sit beside the ashes, weeping tears as big as apples. These stories were not seen as sadistic or traumatic. They were considered effective, even necessary tools for moral instruction. The logic was simple and, to the Victorian mind, unassailable. Children lacked the reasoning skills to understand abstract moral arguments. Therefore, you had to appeal to their more primal emotions. Fear was the most efficient teacher. A child who was terrified of having their thumbs cut off was unlikely to suck them. A child who had a vivid mental image of being burned to a crisp was unlikely to play with fire. It was behavioral psychology in its most blunt and brutal form. This brings us to a wonderfully strange and specific subgenre of these tales, the deathbed narrative. These were stories often published in religious magazines for children that recounted in loving, sentimental detail the final days of a pious, perfect child. The child in the story is always impossibly good. They face their painful, wasting illness with serene acceptance, spending their last moments urging their tearful parents and naughty siblings to find Jesus. They die with a beatific smile on their face, assured of their place in heaven. The intended lesson for you, the child listener, was twofold. First, it was a reminder that you could die at any time, a very real possibility in this era. Second, it presented an idealized model of how to die well, which was, by extension, a model of how to live well with piety, obedience, and a focus on the afterlife. Why this obsession with such grim and terrifying tales? Historians see it as a direct reflection of the anxieties of the age. This was a society grappling with high rates of child mortality, rapid social change, and a stern, judgmental form of Christianity. The world was seen as a dangerous place, full of physical and moral perils. These stories were a way of arming a child against those dangers. They were a form of scared straight for the 7-year-old Set. If the world is truly as dangerous as they believed it to be, then scaring a child into obedience was a small price to pay for keeping them safe and ensuring their salvation. The debate among scholars is whether this method was effective or simply cruel. Did these stories actually produce more virtuous children, or did they just produce more anxious and fearful ones? Some argue that this constant exposure to themes of punishment, mutilation, and death must have been psychologically scarring, creating a baseline of anxiety that would last a lifetime. They suggest it taught children that the world is a place where one small mistake can lead to catastrophic, irreversible consequences. Others contend that we might be projecting our modern sensibilities onto the past. They argue that children of this era were less sheltered from the realities of death and hardship, and may have been more resilient to such stories. They also point out that the stories, with their clear cause and effect structure and rhyming couplets, had a certain grim appeal and were often morbidly fascinating to children themselves. Did kids see them as genuine threats, or as a kind of thrilling, gothic nursery rhyme? The truth is likely somewhere in between. For you, listening to these stories in the flickering lamplight, the effect is potent. The world, which already seemed full of rules, now seems full of hidden dangers. A simple, childish impulse to suck your thumb, to play with a forbidden object, is revealed to be a gateway to horror. You lie in your bed, the terrifying images from the storybook swimming in your mind. You are being taught that obedience is not just a matter of good manners, it is a matter of life and death. And a good night's sleep, you are learning, is for children who have been very, very good. Once a day, usually in the late afternoon or early evening, you are summoned from the nursery for the most formal and nerve-wracking event of your daily schedule, the children's hour. This is your daily audience with your parents. It is not a time for casual, affectionate family bonding. It is a performance and inspection, and a carefully managed presentation of you, the child. The preparation for this event begins long before you leave the nursery. Your nanny conducts a thorough review. Your hands and face are scrubbed clean. Your hair is brushed until it shines. You are changed out of your everyday play or schoolroom clothes and into a fresh, often more elaborate outfit. For a girl, this might be a smocked dress with a lace collar and a silk sash. For a boy, a velvet suit with an immaculate white shirt. You are a product being readied for display. Your nanny's reputation rests on your appearance. Any smudge of dirt or unruly strand of hair is a black mark against her. Once you are deemed presentable, you are led downstairs. You do not burst into the drawing room. You pause at the door, waiting to be acknowledged and invited in. You enter quietly and politely. Your father might be reading his newspaper by the fire. Your mother might be doing needlepoint or entertaining guests. The atmosphere is calm, adult, and serene, and you are the visiting delegation from the foreign land of childhood. You walk to your mother and kiss her cheek, a light, formal peck. You shake your father's hand. If there are guests, you perform your polite greetings, the little curtsies and handshakes you have practiced so many times. Then the inspection begins. Your mother might look you over, her eyes checking for any imperfections in your attire. Your father might ask you a question designed to test your progress. Recite the poem your governess taught you this week, or what is the capital of Prussia. This is your moment to shine, to demonstrate that their investment in your upbringing is paying off. You stand up straight and deliver your memorized lines. You answer the questions clearly and correctly. The goal is to be charming, accomplished, and utterly untroubling. You are to be a source of parental pride, a living testament to their good taste and sound judgment. After the performance and inspection phase, you are expected to find a quiet activity. You might be given a picture book to look at silently, or a simple, non-messy puzzle to work on. You are to occupy yourself in a way that is graceful and unobtrusive. The conversation of the adults will flow around you and over you, a river of words about politics, finances, and social engagements that you are not expected to understand or participate in. You are a silent, decorative presence in their world. A curious detail of this ritual is the physical distance often maintained. While you might be allowed to sit on a small stool near your mother's feet, the kind of casual physical affection we associate with family life, a spontaneous hug, a playful tussle with dad, is largely absent. Affection is demonstrated through a proud smile at a well-recited poem or a nod of approval at your clean fingernails. It is a more formal, reserved language of love. Historians have long been fascinated by the children's hour, seeing it as a perfect microcosm of the Victorian family structure. Why was this interaction so formal and scheduled? Some scholars argue it was a direct result of the separate spheres ideology. The father, having spent his day in the harsh world of commerce, desired a peaceful and orderly home. The mother, having spent her day managing the complex machinery of the household, also needed a respite. The children's hour was a way to fit the children in without disrupting this carefully maintained adult serenity. It was family time, but on adult terms. Others see it as a reflection of changing ideas about parenthood. For the first time, fathers, particularly in the middle class, were being told by advice manuals that they should take an active interest in their children's moral and intellectual development. The children's hour was a structured way to fulfill this new paternal duty. By quizzing you on your lessons, your father wasn't being cold. He was being a modern, involved dad by the standards of his day. The debate continues. Was this ritual a symptom of emotional distance, or a new, albeit awkward, attempt at parental engagement? For you, the child, the experience is one of high-stakes performance anxiety. This is your one chance each day to win the direct approval of your parents, these powerful and distant figures who control your world. You feel the weight of their expectations. You are desperate to please, to be seen as good. The praise, when it comes, is a warm and intoxicating relief. The disapproval, a quiet frown or a sharp word, is devastating. You learn that love and approval are things to be earned through good behavior and tangible accomplishments. They are not freely given. As the clock on the mantelpiece chimes the end of the hour, you are dismissed. You say your polite good nights and are led back up the stairs to the familiar territory of the nursery, your daily performance complete. You can relax now, back in your own world, but the lessons of the drawing room linger. As you spend more time in the adult world of the drawing room, you learn that speaking is not about expressing what you think, but about saying the right thing at the right time. Your training in polite conversation is as rigorous as your lessons in penmanship or piano. It is the art of crafting a smooth, agreeable, and entirely empty dialogue. Your governess or your mother will drill you on conversational scripts. You are given a set of pre-approved questions to ask adults, and a set of polite, standard answers to give. If a guest asks, "Are you enjoying your studies?" you are not to say, "No, I find Latin dreadfully boring." You are to say, "Yes, thank you, Mom. I find it most stimulating." You are taught to show interest in others by asking about their health or their family, but never to pry into personal matters. The goal is to keep the surface of the conversation perfectly smooth and unruffled. A key rule is the avoidance of any topic that could be considered controversial, unpleasant, or overly personal. You do not talk about politics in mixed company. You do not talk about money. You certainly do not talk about illness or death, unless in hushed, sentimental tones. Most importantly, you do not talk about your own strong feelings. Enthusiasm is to be moderated. To be excited about something is a bit vulgar. A polite, "I am very much looking forward to it," is preferred. Similarly, disappointment or anger are to be suppressed entirely. To express such raw emotions would be a social catastrophe, a sign of a shocking lack of self-control. You are also taught the art of the polite deflection. If asked a question you do not wish to answer, you learn to gently steer the conversation in another direction. What a fascinating question. It reminds me of a book I was reading the other day. This creates a conversational style that is constantly gliding over the surface, never dipping into the messy depths of genuine opinion or feeling. One of the most peculiar and illustrative examples of this conversational training is the language of flowers. In an era where direct emotional expression was taboo, the Victorians developed a complex symbolic code using flowers. This was a way to communicate feelings, love, jealousy, friendship, grief without having to speak them aloud. You might learn that a red rose means passionate love, a yellow rose means jealousy, and a lily of the valley means a return to happiness. Young men and women would exchange small bouquets, called tussimus, which were actually coded messages. This is the perfect metaphor for their conversational ideal. Your true feelings are hidden, disguised in a pretty, socially acceptable form. You don't say what you mean, you signal it elegantly. So why was conversation so stilted and indirect? Historians argue it was a necessary social lubricant in a very rigid and hierarchical society. When you are constantly interacting with people of different social ranks, superiors, inferiors, and equals, a set of predictable, formal conversational rules helps to avoid accidental offense. It prevents the social awkwardness that can arise from too much honesty or spontaneity. It keeps everyone in their proper place and ensures that interactions run smoothly. It was a kind of social technology for minimizing friction. Another school of thought, rooted in psychology, argues that this conversational style was a defense mechanism. In a world that demanded emotional repression, people simply lacked the vocabulary and the emotional tools to engage in open, honest dialogue. They were not taught how to articulate their feelings, so they retreated into the safety of formal, impersonal topics. The empty chatter about the weather or a neighbor's new bonnet was a shield, protecting them from the terrifying vulnerability of self-revelation. The academic debate here is whether this was a conscious strategy for social navigation or an unconscious symptom of collective emotional illiteracy. For you, the child, this training has a profound effect. You learn to distrust your own spontaneous thoughts. Before you speak, you run your words through a mental filter. Is this polite? Is this appropriate? Is this what the adult wants to hear? You become a careful editor of your own voice. You learn to separate your inside thoughts from your outside words. The inside you might be bored or fascinated or angry, but the outside you is always pleasant, calm, and agreeable. You listen to the adult's conversations, a gentle murmur of polite phrases, compliments, and neutral observations. You notice the things that are never said, the silences that hang in the air around certain topics. You are learning that communication is not about connection, it is about performance. It is about maintaining a pleasant facade, a collective fiction that everyone is happy, everything is fine, and no one is feeling anything too strongly. You are mastering the art of saying nothing beautifully. Beyond your words and your actions, the very way you hold your body is under constant scrutiny. In the Victorian world, posture is not just a matter of physical health, it is a direct and visible expression of your moral character. To slouch is not merely a bad habit, it is a sign of a lazy mind, a weak will, and a slovenly soul. The horror of slouching is a lesson taught early and enforced with relentless vigilance. From your earliest years in the nursery, you are told to sit up straight and shoulders back. If you are caught slumping at your lessons, your governess might tap your back sharply with a ruler. If you slouch at the dinner table, you will receive a piercing glare from your father. The ideal posture is ramrod straight, a perfect vertical line from your head to your seat. This was believed to be not only elegant but also medically sound, promoting good circulation and allowing the internal organs to function properly. For girls, the policing of posture is even more intense. A graceful, upright carriage is considered an essential part of feminine beauty and refinement. To achieve this, you might be subjected to a variety of uncomfortable and restrictive devices. The most common is the backboard. This was a flat, unyielding piece of wood, sometimes with straps, that you would be forced to wear for several hours a day. It would be strapped to your back, from your neck to your waist, making it physically impossible for you to slump. You would have to take your lessons, eat your meals, and do your needlepoint while strapped to this device, a constant, rigid reminder of the ideal posture you were meant to internalize. Another popular method was to have you lie flat on the floor without a pillow, for a set period each day, sometimes with a heavy book placed on your forehead or chest. The goal was to train your muscles and your mind to recognize and maintain a perfectly straight spine. These practices were not seen as punitive, but as corrective and therapeutic, a necessary intervention to prevent the moral and physical decay associated with poor posture. One of the most extreme and bizarre manifestations of this obsession was the posture collar. This was a device, often made of leather or metal and lined with velvet, that was fastened around the neck. It had a support that rested on the sternum and another that pushed up under the chin, forcing the wearer to keep their head held high. It was, in effect, a fashionable neck brace, designed to prevent the unladylike sin of looking down or slumping forward. While not universally used, its existence in catalogs and advertisements of the era speaks volumes about the anxieties surrounding posture. Why this fanatical focus on being upright? Historians connect it to the core values of the Victorian era: discipline, self-control, and the triumph of the will over the body. A straight spine was a metaphor for a straight character. It symbolized a person who was morally upright, alert, and in command of themselves. A slouching body, in contrast, suggested a lack of discipline, a surrender to physical laziness, and a general moral laxity. In a society that was deeply anxious about social appearances, your posture was a constant public broadcast of your inner state. There is also a class dimension to this. The ability to maintain a perfect, graceful posture was seen as a hallmark of the aristocracy and the refined upper classes. Laborers, farmers, and factory workers were often bent and stooped from years of physical toil. A ramrod straight back, therefore, was a sign that you did not have to perform manual labor. It was a subtle but powerful signal of your privileged social position. The debate among historians is whether the primary driver was this moral symbolism or this class signaling. Was it about looking righteous or looking rich? Most likely, the two were inextricably linked. For you, the child, this constant correction of your physical form is exhausting. Your body feels less like your own and more like a public project, something to be managed and improved by the adults around you. You develop a hyper-awareness of your own physical presence. Is my back straight? Are my shoulders back? Is my chin up? The natural, comfortable slump of a tired child is a forbidden pleasure. You learn to hold your body in a state of constant, low-level tension. You are being trained to present a facade of alertness and control, even when you feel tired or bored. Your body, like your conversation, is being molded into a shape that is pleasing to others, a perfect, upright citizen in a world that fears, above all, the moral danger of the slump. Of all the days of the week, one stands apart, draped in a heavy cloak of silence and solemnity. Sunday. The Victorian Sabbath is not a day of rest and relaxation in the modern sense. It is a day of rigid observance, enforced quiet, and a near total cessation of all enjoyable activities. For a child, it is a weekly exercise in quiet endurance, a long, slow march through a landscape of dance. The day begins with a different set of clothes. You are dressed in your Sunday best, which is even more formal and restrictive than your daily good clothes. The fabrics are stiffer, the colors are tighter. These clothes are not meant for play, they are meant for sitting still in a church pew. After a quiet breakfast, the entire household prepares for church. The service is long, the sermon is longer, the pews are hard. You are expected to sit perfectly still, your hands folded in your lap, your eyes fixed on the preacher. Fidgeting is a grave sin. A cough must be stifled. A yawn is a sign of a soul in peril. You might not understand the complex theology being discussed from the pulpit, but you understand the imperative to be silent and still. The rest of the day unfolds under a blanket of prohibitions. All of your weekday toys are locked away. Your dolls, your lead soldiers, your building blocks, they are all considered frivolous and inappropriate for the Lord's day. Running is forbidden. Shouting is unthinkable. Even loud talking is discouraged. The entire house sinks into a state of hushed reverence. So what are you allowed to do? Your activities are limited to those that are considered morally edifying. You may read, but only certain books. The Bible is, of course, approved. So are books of sermons, collections of hymns, and grimly moralistic stories like The Pilgrim's Progress. Any book that could be considered mere entertainment a novel, a book of adventure, is put aside until Monday. You might be allowed to play with a Sunday toy, a special category of plaything deemed appropriate for the Sabbath. The most common example is a Noah's Ark set, with its biblical theme. It was considered an educational and religious toy. You could arrange the little wooden animals, but you were expected to do so quietly and reverently, perhaps reenacting the story of the Great Flood. It was play, but it was sanctified play. Even a simple walk was different on a Sunday. It was not a brisk constitutional, but a slow, solemn procession, often to a cemetery to contemplate mortality, or to visit relatives for quiet, formal conversation. A particularly telling detail of the Victorian Sunday is the Sunday clothes for dolls phenomenon. A girl who was deeply attached to her doll might be permitted to have her on a Sunday, but only if the doll was also dressed in its own special, somber Sunday outfit. This perfectly captures the all-encompassing nature of the Sabbath rules. Even the imaginary world of a child's play had to conform to the solemnity of the day. Why this crushing, joyless observance? Historians trace it to the influence of Sabbatarianism, a powerful movement within Protestantism that insisted on a very strict and literal interpretation of the fourth commandment to keep holy the Sabbath day. For devout Victorians, this was not a matter of custom, but of divine law. To profane the Sabbath with work or worldly pleasures was to risk God's wrath, not just for the individual, but for the entire nation. The solemn Victorian Sunday was a collective act of piety, a national display of righteousness. The debate among social historians is about the true impact of this practice. Did it succeed in instilling a deep and lasting sense of piety in the younger generation? Or did it, through its sheer relentless boredom, actually create a deep-seated resentment toward religion itself? Many autobiographies from the period recount the exquisite misery of the childhood Sunday. They describe the feeling of being trapped, the desperate longing for Monday to arrive. For every person whose faith was deepened by this solemn observance, there may have been another who was pushed away, associating religion forever with restriction and the absence of joy. Was it a foundation for faith or a recipe for apostasy? For you, the child, Sunday is a long, gray sigh. It is a day defined by what you cannot do. You learn to move more slowly, to speak more quietly, to suppress your natural ebullience. You learn to find ways to pass the time that are silent and invisible. You might stare out the window for hours, your imagination the only place where you can run and shout. The day teaches you a powerful lesson in self-control and the patient endurance of boredom. And as you lie in bed on Sunday night, the silence of the house still pressing in on you, the most exciting thought in the world is the sound of the world waking up again on Monday morning. Your religious instruction, which reaches its peak in the solemnity of the Victorian Sunday, introduces you to the most powerful authority figure of all. He is not your father, not your nanny, not your governess. He is God. And the God you are taught to know is not a gentle, loving shepherd. He is a stern, meticulous, and ever-present judge. Your concept of God is formed through the stories you are read, the hymns you sing, and the prayers you are taught to recite. The emphasis is overwhelmingly on His power, His omniscience, and His righteousness. You learn that God is all-seeing. The popular hymn All Things Bright and Beautiful contains the line, "The Lord God made them all." But the underlying theology you absorb is that the Lord God sees them all. He sees you when you are sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, and He is taking notes. You are taught that every thought, every word, every secret act of disobedience is recorded in a great book in heaven. At the final judgment, this book will be opened, and your entire life will be laid bare for all to see. This is a terrifying concept for a child. The secret anger you felt at your brother, the biscuit you stole from the pantry, the lie you told your nanny, none of it is forgotten. God is the ultimate surveillance system, a divine authority from whom no secret can be kept. Your prayers recited nightly at your bedside are often petitions for forgiveness. You are taught to confess your sins of the day, to ask God to make you a better child. The language of these prayers reinforces the idea that you are inherently flawed, naturally inclined to sin, and in constant need of correction and forgiveness. Your relationship with the divine is not one of joyful communion, but of a subordinate pleading with a powerful and easily displeased superior. A central theme of your religious education is the fear of hell. While heaven is described in vague, pleasant terms, a place of rest, with angels and golden streets, hell is depicted with vivid, terrifying clarity. It is a place of fire and brimstone, of weeping and gnashing of teeth, a place of eternal, conscious torment. The popular children's hymns of the day, like Isaac Watts' Divine Songs for Children, contain stark warnings about the fate of liars and disobedient children. One verse bluntly states, "'Tis dangerous to provoke a God, his power and vengeance spread abroad." The message is clear. The stakes for good behavior are not just social approval, but eternal salvation. One of the most revealing and specific artifacts of this religious worldview is the tract. These were small, cheaply printed religious pamphlets that were distributed by the millions. There were tracts specifically for children, often telling the story of a wicked child who refuses to repent and comes to a terrible, untimely end, his soul lost forever. These tracts would be given to you by your governess or a visiting clergyman, another little dose of fear to keep you on the straight and narrow path. So, why was this vision of God so harsh and judgmental? Historians link it directly to the dominance of Calvinist and evangelical theology in 19th century America and Britain. This was a theology that emphasized human depravity, the idea that humans are born sinful, and the absolute sovereignty of God. It was a serious, demanding faith for a serious, demanding age. In a world that felt precarious and full of moral danger, a soft or overly permissive God seemed inadequate. A stern, watchful God who demanded righteousness and punished sin was a better fit for their worldview. He was the divine reflection of the stern, watchful Victorian father. The academic debate is about the psychological consequences of this upbringing. Did this constant fear of divine judgment create a generation of morally upright, God-fearing citizens, or did it create a generation plagued by anxiety, guilt, and what would later be termed religious crupulosity, an obsessive-compulsive fear of having sinned? Many psychoanalytic historians argue the latter. They suggest that internalizing an all-seeing, judgmental I can lead to a lifetime of self-criticism, perfectionism, and an inability to experience grace or self-forgiveness. On the other hand, some historians argue that we should not underestimate the comfort that this faith could also provide. For all its sternness, it also offered a clear moral framework, a sense of purpose, and the promise of ultimate justice and reward. In a world of uncertainty, the absolute certainties of this faith could be a powerful anchor. The debate hinges on whether the primary emotional product of this theology was fear or security. For you, the child, God is the silent, invisible witness to your life. He is the reason behind the rules. You must not lie, not just because your mother will be angry, but because God will see it, be recorded in His book. You must honor your father and mother, not just because it is polite, but because it is a divine commandment. This adds an immense, cosmic weight to your every action. You are living on a grand stage with an audience of one, and the final review will determine your eternal fate. It is a heavy burden for small shoulders to carry. As you enter adolescence, your world of simple rights and wrongs don't lie. Don't steal. Obey your parents is suddenly complicated by a new, shadowy, and terrifying category of sin. It is spoken of only in whispers and vague, ominous warnings. It is the secret sin, the solitary vice, or, in the medical text of the day, self-abuse. This is the Victorian era's all-encompassing, hysterical fear of masturbation. The warnings come not in clear anatomical terms, but in a coded language of impending doom. Your father might take you aside for a grim, awkward talk, or your governess might leave a chillingly vague pamphlet on your bedside table. The message, however delivered, is the same. This secret habit is a poison that will destroy you body and soul. It is presented not as a harmless, natural part of growing up, but as a gateway to madness, disease, and death. The medical literature and popular health manuals of the day are filled with a horrifying list of symptoms supposedly caused by this vice. It was blamed for everything from acne, bad posture, and heart palpitations to epilepsy, blindness, and insanity. The image of the masturbator was a stock character in cautionary tales, a pale, listless youth with sunken eyes, a weak handshake, and a general air of shame and decay. This sin was seen as a depletion of one's vital force, a finite energy that once squandered could never be regained. For boys, every act was a step closer to impotence and physical ruin. For girls, it was a path to hysteria, infertility, and the loss of the delicate, feminine purity that was their most valuable asset. This moral panic led to the creation of a whole host of truly bizarre and disturbing cures and preventative devices. For boys, this included the spermatic truss, the device worn at night that applied pressure to the genitals, or cages and rings, sometimes with sharp interior spikes, designed to make an erection painful or impossible. Some doctors advocated for more extreme measures, such as cauterizing the urethra or even circumcision, which was promoted by figures like Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, the same man who invented cornflakes as a way to reduce sensitivity and curb the impulse. For girls, the cures were often just as invasive, including the application of carbolic acid to the clitoris or, in the most extreme cases, a surgical procedure known as a clit or idectomy. These were not seen as barbaric acts, but as life-saving medical interventions performed by serious doctors trying to save young people from a path of self-destruction. A fascinatingly weird detail is the intense suspicion directed at certain foods and activities. Spicy foods, rich meats, coffee, and even chocolate were all believed to stimulate the passions and lead a young person toward this secret sin. Feather beds were considered to soften warm, and were thought to be conducive to impure thoughts. Even riding a horse was sometimes viewed with suspicion, particularly for girls. The entire environment of a young person was to be managed to reduce any possible source of physical or mental stimulation. So, where did this all-consuming, wildly unscientific panic come from? Historians point to a perfect storm of factors. First, the rise of a professional medical class that was eager to assert its authority over all aspects of life, including sexuality. By medicalizing masturbation, they turned the moral issue into a disease that only they could diagnose and treat. Second, it was tied to the economic values of the era. In a capitalist society that valued productivity, self-control, and the husbanding of resources, the spending of one's vital energy in a non-productive, non-procreative act was seen as the ultimate form of wasteful self-indulgence. Your body's energy was a resource to be invested wisely in work and, eventually, in creating a legitimate family. The debate among historians is about the true nature of this panic. Was it a genuine, albeit deeply misguided, public health concern? Or was it a powerful to love social control? Some argue that by creating an intense, internalized fear around sexuality, the Victorian establishment was able to produce a generation that was more docile, more obedient, and more focused on the proper channels for their energy, work and family. By making young people terrified of their own bodies, you make them easier to manage. Others see it as a tragic chapter in the history of medicine, a moment when moral prejudice masqueraded as scientific fact, with devastating consequences for countless young people. For you, the adolescent, this is a period of intense confusion, shame, and fear. The normal, natural changes happening in your body are framed as a dangerous moral disease. You begin to see your own burgeoning sexuality not as a source of potential pleasure or intimacy, but as a dark, internal enemy that must be fought and conquered. You live in fear of the telltale signs, scrutinizing your reflection for any hint of the dreaded masturbator's face. You are trapped in a battle against your own nature, armed only with terrifying misinformation and a profound sense of guilt. It is perhaps the cruelest lesson of your upbringing. Your body and its most private feelings cannot be trusted. When you get sick, and in an era of primitive sanitation and rampant disease, you will get sick. The response is not one of gentle reassurance and simple remedies. Instead, you are introduced to the wild, unregulated, and often dangerous world of Victorian patent medicines. Your nanny or mother, faced with your fever, cough, or stomachache, will likely turn not to a doctor for such a common ailment, but to the cabinet of bottled cures that promise immediate relief. The labels on these bottles are a masterclass in advertising, featuring impressive-sounding names, elegant script, and bold claims. Dr. Williams' pink pills for pale people promises to cure everything from lumbago to female weakness. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup is a godsend for mothers with a teething, crying baby. Ayer's cherry pectoral will surely take care of that nasty cough. These medicines are ubiquitous, advertised in every newspaper and magazine, their colorful posters adorning walls and streetcars. They are a symbol of modern, scientific progress, a quick fix available to everyone. The problem is what's inside the bottle. With no government regulation, the Food and Drug Administration is still decades away. Manufacturers could put anything they wanted into their concoctions, and they did not have to list the ingredients. That soothing syrup you are given for your teething pain. Its primary active ingredient is morphine, a powerful opiate. It works wonderfully. It sedates the baby, stopping the crying and ensuring a quiet house. It is also highly addictive, and countless infants became dependent on it, with many dying from accidental overdoses. The newspapers of the day morbidly referred to them as the little quiet nurse. That cough syrup, the cherry pectoral, might contain a mixture of alcohol and opium. The restorative tonic designed to give you energy could be little more than caffeine, alcohol, and dissolved cocaine. Many of the all-purpose painkillers and female problem remedies were laced with laudanum, a tincture of opium in alcohol. You are being treated for your childhood ailments with a cocktail of powerful, addictive narcotics. A particularly telling example of this medical madness is the use of mercury. The compound calomel mercure OUS chloride was a shockingly common ingredient in everything from teething powders to laxatives. Doctors and parents believed it was a purgative, cleansing the system of toxins. In reality, it was a poison. It caused profuse drooling, which was misinterpreted as a sign that the medicine was working. In truth, it was a symptom of mercury poisoning which could lead to severe neurological damage, tooth loss, and death. A condition known as pink disease in infants characterized by pink, swollen hands and feet, irritability, and muscle weakness is now known to have been caused by mercury exposure from these popular powders. So why did people so readily dose themselves and their children with these dangerous substances? Historians point to several factors. There was a profound faith in science and the authority of anyone calling themselves a doctor, even if they had no medical training. The powerful advertising created a sense of trust and reassurance, and crucially, the medicines often seemed to work. The opiates did dull the pain and stop the coughing. The cocaine did give a temporary burst of energy. In the short term, the symptoms were relieved, leading people to believe the cure was effective, even as it was creating a deeper, more dangerous problem of addiction or poisoning. The academic debate centers on whether the manufacturers of these products were cynical charlatans or true believers in their own remedies. Were they knowingly poisoning and addicting the public for profit? Or were they operating within the accepted, albeit deeply flawed, medical framework of their time, genuinely believing that these powerful substances were beneficial? Many historians argue for the former, pointing to the deliberate and deceptive marketing practices. They see the patent medicine boom as a dark chapter of early capitalism, where public health was sacrificed for profit. Others suggest a more complex picture, where some manufacturers were indeed hucksters while others were simply packaging the same dangerous ingredients that respectable doctors were also prescribing. For you, the sick child, the experience is one of passive acceptance. You are told to take your medicine, and you open your mouth. You swallow the sweet, strange-tasting liquid. You may feel drowsy, or oddly energetic, or simply quiet. You learn that feeling unwell is something to be quickly and chemically suppressed. The adults in your life, acting out of what they believe is love and concern, are unwittingly playing a dangerous game of Russian roulette with your health, armed with a cabinet full of attractively bottled poisons. In the quiet, orderly world of your Victorian home, there is an unspoken and ever-present guest, the possibility of death. You live with a constant, low-level awareness of life's fragility, an understanding shaped not by dramatic events, but by the quiet presence of the empty chair. Childhood mortality rates are staggeringly high. Diseases that are now minor inconveniences or preventable with vaccines: measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough are swift and often fatal executioners. You might have known a sibling who is no longer here. Perhaps there is a portrait of a baby on the mantelpiece, a child you never met but whose name is spoken in hushed, sad tones. Or maybe you remember a time when the house was plunged into a state of deep, formal mourning. The curtains were drawn, the mirrors were covered, and your parents wore black for a year or more. You were told that your brother or sister had been taken by the angels and had gone to live in heaven. The rituals surrounding death are elaborate and deeply ingrained in the culture. When a child dies, it is common to have a post-mortem photograph taken. This seems morbid to us, but for a family in an age before casual snapshots, this might be the only image they would ever have of their lost child. In these haunting photographs, the deceased child is often posed as if sleeping, sometimes surrounded by toys or held in the arms of their grieving mother. It was a final, desperate attempt to capture a fleeting presence. You also learn about grief through the elaborate material culture of mourning. Your mother might wear mourning jewelry, a locket or a brooch containing a lock of the lost child's hair. This was not seen as strange or macabre. It was a cherished, tangible connection to the one who was gone. You might see a small, unused rocking horse in the corner of the nursery, a silent testament to a life that was never lived. This ever-present reality of death has a profound impact on the emotional landscape of the family. On one hand, it can create a sense of preciousness, a desire to protect the surviving children at all costs. On the other hand, as we have discussed, it can lead to a kind of emotional preemptive defense, a reluctance to invest one's whole heart in something so easily taken away. A small, sad detail that captures this reality is the practice of reusing a name. It was not uncommon for a family who lost a child, say a boy named John, to give the same name to their next-born son. This seems profoundly strange to our modern sensibilities, which are so focused on individual identity. But in their world, it was often seen as a way of honoring the deceased and continuing the name. It also speaks to a slightly different conception of identity, one that was perhaps more focused on the continuation of the family line than on the unique individuality of each child. So how did this constant proximity to death shape the Victorian mindset? Historians are divided. One school of thought, the emotional distance theory, argues that high mortality rates forced parents to maintain a certain reserve with their children. It was a psychological survival strategy. If you expected to lose one or two of your 7 children, you couldn't afford to be as openly and intensely attached as modern parents are. This theory is used to explain many of the practices we've seen: the use of nannies, the formal children's hour, the emphasis on discipline over affection. However, a more recent school of thought challenges this idea. These historians argue that the opposite is true. They look at the outpouring of grief in Victorian diaries, letters, and poetry, the elaborate mourning rituals, the cherished post-mortem photographs, and they see a society that felt the loss of a child with profound, devastating intensity. They argue that the formality and ritual were not a sign of a lack of feeling, but a way of coping with feelings that were almost too powerful to bear. In their view, the Victorian parent loved their child just as deeply as any parent today. They just had to face the loss of that child far more often. Was their formality a shield against pain or a structured container for overwhelming grief? The debate is one of the most compelling in the social history of the family. For you, the child, this reality seeps into your consciousness. You understand, on a level you can't yet articulate, that life is not guaranteed. The cautionary tales about bad children meeting bad ends are reinforced by the real-life examples of good children who simply fell ill and disappeared. It can create a sense of anxiety, a fear of illness, a wariness of the world. But it can also instill a certain stoicism, an early acceptance of loss as a part of life. You learn that people you love can vanish. The empty chair at the dinner table, or the silent corner of the nursery, is a constant, quiet teacher, instructing you in the Victorian era's most difficult and unavoidable lesson, the profound precariances of life. If you are a girl, your entire life, every lesson in posture, every piano scale, every stilted conversation has been a meticulously planned rehearsal for one grand, climactic performance. As you approach the end of your teenage years, typically around the age of 18, you prepare for your grand debut. This is your formal, public launch into society, and its primary, though unspoken, purpose is to find a suitable husband. The preparations are all-consuming. The final year with your governess is spent not on rigorous academics, but on a final polish of your accomplishments. You practice your French, you perfect a few impressive but not too showy piano pieces, and you refine your watercolor technique. Your life becomes a whirlwind of fittings with dressmakers. You will need a vast and expensive new wardrobe, morning dresses, afternoon dresses, walking costumes, and most importantly, a collection of stunning ball gowns. The centerpiece of this sartorial arsenal is your presentation gown, a pure white dress, symbolizing your innocence and purity, which you will wear when you are formally presented at a reception or court. The debut itself is not a single event, but a grueling season of social engagements. It begins with a grand ball or a large coming-out party hosted by your parents. This is the official announcement that you are now out in society and available for marriage. The guest list is carefully curated to include the most eligible young men from the right families. Your father is, in effect, showcasing his most valuable asset. For the next several months, your life is a blur of balls, dinner parties, afternoon teas, and visits to the opera. Your dance card at each ball becomes a document of immense strategic importance. To be seen with a full dance card, pursued by a number of eligible bachelors, is a sign of success. To be a wallflower, left sitting on the sidelines, is a social catastrophe. You are constantly on display, your every word and action judged by prospective suitors and their discerning mothers, the powerful matriarchs who often hold the real power in these negotiations. You must navigate a labyrinth of unspoken rules. You cannot appear too eager, which would be unladylike, nor too aloof, which might drive away potential partners. You must be charming but not overly witty, beautiful but not vain, accomplished but not intimidating. You are walking a tightrope of perfect, modest femininity. A fashionably stressful detail of this process is the morning call. After meeting a young lady at a ball, a prospective suitor might signal his interest by leaving his calling card at her family's home the next day. A complex etiquette governed this ritual. If the family approved of him, they would in turn send him an invitation to a future event. If not, his card would go unanswered. The collection of calling cards in a silver tray in the entrance hall became a public scoreboard of a young woman's social success. So why was this system so elaborate and high stakes? Historians see the debutante system as a marriage market, pure and simple. In the upper classes, marriage was not just about love and companionship. It was a strategic alliance between families. It was about consolidating wealth, preserving bloodlines, and maintaining social status. A good match for you meant marrying a man of equal or, ideally, greater wealth and social standing. Your personal feelings, while not entirely irrelevant, were secondary to these practical considerations. Your parents have invested a fortune in your upbringing and your debut. They expect a good return on their investment in the form of a successful marital alliance. The academic debate is about the agency of the young women within this system. Were they simply passive pawns, beautifully dressed commodities being traded by their fathers, or did they find ways to exercise their own will and preferences? Some historians, focusing on the restrictive rules and economic realities, argue that these women had very little real choice. Their entire upbringing was designed to make them accept this system and to desire the security and status that came with a good marriage. However, other historians, reading diaries and letters from the period, find evidence of subtle resistance and personal choice. A young woman might not be able to refuse a suitable match outright without causing a family scandal, but she could subtly discourage a suitor she disliked. She could use her charm and wit to attract the attention of a man she genuinely preferred, even if he was not her parents' first choice. They argue that while the field of play was rigged, smart and savvy young women could still find ways to play the game to their own advantage. Was it a cattle market or a complex game of social chess? For you, the debutante, it is a period of exhilarating pressure and profound anxiety. On one hand, it is exciting. You are wearing beautiful clothes, attending glamorous parties, and being the center of attention for the first time in your life. On the other hand, you are aware that your entire future hangs in the balance. Every smile, every dance, every conversation is part of a high-stakes audition. Your childhood of being seen and not heard is over. You are now being seen, heard, and appraised. And the final judgment will be a proposal of marriage, the culmination and conclusion of your Victorian girlhood. If you are a boy, your path is less about a single, glittering social season and more about a long, steady march toward a predetermined future. Your upbringing, the lead soldiers, the Latin lessons, the emphasis on discipline and fortitude has all been preparation for you to take your place in the public sphere. Your future is not a matter of whom you will marry, but what you will do. And for a young man of the respectable middle or upper class, the options are clear, honorable, and often not of your own choosing. Your formal education is the primary sorting mechanism. After your time with the governess, you are sent away to boarding school. This is a brutal, hardening experience, designed to sever your ties to the soft, feminine world of the home and forge you into a man. At schools like Eton or Groton, you learn to be self-reliant, to navigate complex social hierarchies among your peers, and to endure physical hardship and casual cruelty with a stiff upper lip. The curriculum is heavy on the classics, mathematics, and team sports, all designed to build character, leadership, and a sense of fair play. From boarding school, you proceed to a university like Harvard, Yale, or Princeton in America, or Oxford and Cambridge in Britain. Here, your academic studies are important, but just as crucial are the social connections you make. Joining the right clubs and fraternities and befriending the sons of influential men is a key part of your higher education. You are building the network that will support your future career. As you approach graduation, the question of your profession becomes paramount. You are not simply asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Instead, you are guided, often with little room for negotiation, into a path that befits your family as station. For the son of a prominent businessman, it is often assumed that you will enter the family firm, starting at a junior position and learning the ropes until you are ready to take over. Your career is a matter of dynastic succession. If there is no family business, or if you are a younger son, you will be directed toward one of the gentlemanly professions. These are careers that carry high social status and are considered suitable for a man of good breeding. The most respected options are the church, the law, and medicine. Becoming a clergyman, a lawyer, or a doctor, all honorable paths. A career in the military as an officer is also a highly respectable choice, particularly as it involves leadership and service to the nation. What you are strongly discouraged from doing is anything that involves trade in the sense of manual labor or retail. To be in business is acceptable if you are a banker, an investor, or the owner of a large factory. To be a shopkeeper is not. You are also discouraged from pursuing a career in the arts, unless you have an independent income. To be a painter or a writer is a fine hobby for a gentleman, but a poor profession, lacking in both financial security and social gravitas. A fascinating, unslightly sad detail of this process is the grand tour. For very wealthy young men, the period after university and before starting a career might include a prolonged trip through Europe. This was supposed to be the final polish on a gentleman's education, an opportunity to see the great art of Italy, to practice languages, and to observe the sophisticated manners of the continent. However, it also often functioned as a final glorious fling, a last taste of freedom before settling into the rigid constraints of a respectable career and marriage. It was a tacit acknowledgement that the life that followed would be one of duty and responsibility, not adventure. Historians debate the impact of this highly structured career path on young men. Was it a source of stability and security, or a crushing denial of individual aspiration? Some scholars argue that in a rapidly changing and uncertain world, having a clear, set path was a source of great psychological comfort. It removed the anxiety of choice and provided a young man with a ready-made identity and a secure place in the world. He knew who he was and what he was supposed to do. Other historians, however, see it as deeply repressive. They point to diaries and letters that reveal the private anguish of young men who felt trapped, forced into a legal career when they longed to be a poet, or pushed into the family business when they dreamed of being an explorer. They argue that this system produced a generation of men who were disconnected from their own passions, who learned to subordinate their personal desires to the demands of family and social expectation. Was it a system for producing responsible citizens or for manufacturing quiet desperation? For you, the young man, your future unfurls before you like a map that has already been drawn. You have been trained your entire life for this role. You know how to dress, how to speak, how to command respect. You have the right education and the right connections. You will enter your chosen profession. You will work hard, and you will eventually marry a suitable young woman, perhaps one you met during her debutante season. You will buy a house. You will have children, and you will raise them according to the same principles by which you were raised. Your path is clear. It is honorable. It is secure. And the question of whether it is the life you would have chosen for yourself is a question you have been taught, from your very first day, never to ask. And so you arrive. You are no longer a child to be managed, but an adult to be admired. You stand in a brightly lit ballroom or a handsome drawing room, a finished product, a testament to decades of careful, relentless cultivation. Your posture is perfect, a straight, elegant line that speaks of backboards and constant correction. Your clothes are impeccable, tailored to the latest fashion, but with a conservative, respectable taste. You navigate the crowded room with an easy, practiced grace, a ghost of your childhood dance lessons guiding your steps. You engage in conversation, and your voice is calm and well modulated. You inquire about the health of an elderly aunt. You comment on the unusually mild weather for the season. You congratulate a contemporary on his recent promotion. Your words are a smooth, polished surface reflecting back the pleasantries of others, revealing nothing of the depths beneath. When someone speaks with too much passion, their voice rising with excitement or their gestures becoming too animated, you feel a faint, internal flicker of disapproval. It seems a bit unseemly, a lack of control. Your relationship with your parents has settled into a pattern of comfortable, respectful distance. They look at you with a deep sense of pride. You are their masterpiece. You have married well. You are established in your career or as the mistress of a fine home, and you have never caused them a moment of public embarrassment. You feel a profound sense of duty and gratitude toward them. The fierce, messy, complicated love you read about in novels seems as foreign and undramatic as the plots of Greek tragedies. Your love is a quiet, well-mannered thing expressed through polite inquiries and the punctual sending of Christmas cards. Every now and then, you feel a strange physical echo of your upbringing. When you sit for too long at your desk, you might feel a sudden phantom rap on your shoulder blades, the ghost of a governess's ruler, reminding you not to slouch. Or you might find yourself automatically arranging the cutlery on your own dinner table with a precision that borders on the obsessive. These are the little glitches in the programming, the muscle memory of your indoctrination. This is the adult the Victorian child-rearing system was designed to create. Poised, disciplined, self-controlled, and emotionally restrained. This is the stiff upper lip in its embryonic form. The ability to endure hardship without complaint, to put duty before personal desire, and to maintain a calm facade in the face of any crisis. These are the highest virtues. And you, my friend, have mastered them. You are a pillar of society, a success. But the great, unresolved debate among historians, psychologists, and sociologists is this: what was the true cost of this success? Was this system the pinnacle of character building, producing the stoic, reliable, and high-minded individuals who built empires, managed global trade, and maintained a stable social order? Proponents both then and now would argue yes. They would say that this rigorous training created adults who understood their place in the world, who valued honor and duty, and who possessed the self-mastery necessary for leadership. It was a system that sacrificed individual whims for the good of the family and society. Or was it, as a later generation of thinkers like Freud would suggest, a massive, society-wide exercise in psychological repression? Did this relentless suppression of natural instincts, this constant denial of emotion, this insistence on conformity, create a generation of deeply neurotic and unhappy individuals? Did it create adults who were strangers to their own hearts, incapable of genuine intimacy, and plagued by a pervasive sense of guilt and anxiety. This school of thought argues that the Victorian era's obsession with morality, its fainting spells, its hysteria, and its dark, secret vices were not signs of a superior civilization, but the predictable symptoms of a society at war with human nature. Was your perfect composure a sign of strength, or the mark of a profound internal fracture? As the evening wears on, you find a quiet moment by a window, looking out at the dark garden. You catch your reflection in the glass. You see a handsome, respectable figure, the very picture of success. But the eyes looking back at you are guarded. You have been so exquisitely trained on how to behave, how to speak, how to stand, how to eat, how to pray. You have been given the answer to every conceivable external question. But no one ever taught you how to ask the internal ones. What do you truly want? What makes you happy? Who are you, behind the perfect posture and the polite conversation? You look at the reflection in the glass at this perfectly polite, successful stranger, and you realize with a sudden, quiet chill that you don't have the slightest idea. And so the party fades. The low murmur of conversation softens, blending with the distant music, until it all becomes a gentle humming sound, like the turning of a fan in a quiet room. You can feel the weight of that starched collar begin to loosen, the stiffness in that perfect posture finally beginning to ease. The watchful eyes of the world are closing one by one. There are no more tests to pass tonight, no more lines to recite. You can let go of the day, just as you let go of the hand of your dance partner. Let it drift away. Feel the cool, quiet air of the garden through that window, a gentle breath washing over you. The world outside is sinking into a deep and peaceful sleep, and you can sink with it, down into the soft, welcoming darkness behind your eyes. There are no rules here, no schedules to keep. Your mind, which has been working so hard for so long, can finally be still. It can float on the quiet tide of your own breathing in and out, a slow and easy rhythm. You are safe now in this gentle, timeless place. The story is over. The day is done. It is time now, just to be, to rest, to dream. The end of the article. Good night.